Hello, we are in conversation with the amazing Joe Williams today. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Ella. Glad to be here. Thank you. How did I become an artist? In middle school, my drama teacher identified I had theatrical skills, which I didn't know I had. And I followed them through, went to a school for the performing arts in Leeds, then went to drama college. It's not all middle school, it's now a police station. It was wonderful, inspirational teachers. I loved the school. They had a quadrangle in the middle with a peacock. When you were in lessons, you're looking out to the quadrangle and you're seeing these peacocks. There was always one or two strutting
Wow.
around. And I found that quite inspirational. It was almost like it was saying, think outside the box. But for the school that it was, I thought it was quite
Yeah.
amazing. And I threw myself into the drama, really enjoyed it. And then the rest is history, as they say. And as I went to drama school, claim to fame, my roommate, who I shared accommodation with, was Ross Kemp. Leave it. We got along famously. But then after we went different ways, because I ended up in theatre and education, really loved theatre and education, telling stories to young people and doing workshops to explore the issues behind what they've seen so they can think on a wider platform and perspective. And I
Mm.
always wanted to apply issues that related to me and my story of being born in Leeds to parents from the West Indies, from Jamaica, in the 1960s. And I wanted to know, well, what is my story and how can I share my story with young people? But sadly, there was like a decline in theatre and education, budgets were being cut. And so my efforts now have been to find different ways of telling what I've learned over the years, because over the past 30 years, I've been doing research into Black British history specifically. And in 2005, working with David Hamilton, the founder of Phoenix Downs Company, we did a production called Runaway Diamonds at the West Yorkshire Playhouse, which told the story of Frederick Douglass. And for many people, they were their minds were blown knowing there was a black man in Yorkshire in the 19th century. Of course, there were many, and many talented people, many people who made a name for themselves, like Ira Aldridge, Sarah Parker Remond, William and Ellen Craft, Pablo Fank. You know, the list is endless. But it's like, well, why can't we tell these stories? And it's been a journey of persuading people that this is actually British history, but with Black people in it, and that's okay. It's not, a terrorist cell that's going to blow up your theatre. There was always suspicion and, nervousness and anxiety.
Yeah.
And so it's about finding different ways to tell your story, whichever discipline you're in. It's using imaginative ways. I did my MA at the university to try and find ways to bring to life the stories on the history walk that I developed in 2009. And so Heritage Corner was born in 2014. And we've put on productions telling the stories of Pablo Fank and Ellen and William Craft and so on and so forth. And we'll keep doing that. And we've had a bumper year this year where we've delivered over twice as many walks as what we do normally, even in COVID. We had
Wow.
to adapt it specially, and we received great help from the Geraldine Connor Foundation, and they took the bookings. And then as we built a relationship, we talked about engaging young artists to
Mm.
respond to the walk. And in very rapid time, they acquired funding from Leeds Inspired, and we engaged 4 young artists to respond in words to the Leeds Black History Walk, and that can be found on the Geraldine Conner Foundation website, and we're uploading it to our website shortly. And those are my creative outlets. That's my passion. That's what I've been fighting for the past couple of decades in trying to get Black British history recognized. And it's been great to see the efforts of historian David Olusoga and
Yeah.
others who are writing books. It's all about informing people. But for myself, as an artist, I want to tell stories about heroes that look like me, that lived in real life. And if you don't know about them, you don't conceive that they exist. So I just want to kill that myth. They do exist, and I'll keep going on about it until you get that message. But that journey started with rejection, of course, and determination. And in the 90s, being fortunate enough to come across a group of historians, and we formed a group called the Leeds Diasporan Stories Research Group, and it was made up of artists and historians and educationalists. And this was a wonderful dynamic that when we found history and we supported each other's projects, and on the basis of that research of that group, we were able to provide historical information for an application that was being made by a group in Chapeltown called the Leeds Bicentenary Transformation Project, who in 2005 were awarded £400,000 to commemorate the abolition of the slave trade. So we used that project to, explain the difference between the abolition of the slave trade and the abolition of slavery, but also about African heritage. And so those 4 years between 2005 and 2009, delivering a variety of projects, including theatre, talks, musical events, lectures, schools projects. Khadija Ibrahim and Michelle Scully Clark were artists in residence with 10 schools. And so it was an opportunity to educate the community and the city at large about the complex issues of the African presence in Britain, that it's not one-dimensional. So going back 6,000 years to ancient African history was a part of that. And at the end of 2009, we thought this information is too rich to just, wave goodbye to, because it represents our humanity. That helps to tell the story of our humanity. And so the Leeds Black History Walk was devised, and that's with the help of a lot of people, Khadija Ibrahim and David Hamilton, both of whom I've named. Arthur France, MBE, was a huge inspiration. Dr. Carl Hilton, who was an academic in the community, as well as Paul Ober, and they worked together quite well. So what I'm trying to say is that it's the evolution of something that involved a lot of people. But I created something in which I could steer and I could perpetuate with minimal resources for 10 years. By talking about it constantly, people are interested and I get engaged for different projects. And that has kept me going all these years unresourced. It's been hard. It's been very hard, and you feel like a parasite because you have a story to tell. We have a heritage industry and an arts industry that's there to tell people's stories, but it's like you're constantly being challenged. Is it necessary? But racism is over now. We can move on. Listening to all those nightmare scenarios around meeting tables over the years, and people not really realizing that we are one of the oldest peoples on the planet, with a recorded, well-documented history, not just written on papyrus, but written in stone, literally.
Yeah.
And it has been hidden from us, obfuscated, appropriated, misrepresented, because if you're one of the old, I think that's Africa's great crime, number one, is being the oldest civilization to have a global impact.
Do you think that's like what all of the fear has come from, actually, is the knowledge and the history and the wisdom?
Yes, because they want to see themselves as the originators. Pyramid is a Greek word meaning layers of pancakes. It's a way of assuring your generation, oh, it's all right, we can do better than that. That's just layers of pancakes. Let's go build a greater civilization. And I think every generation needs to have that sense of aspiration and hope. I think that's important. So it's not that I see dismissing previous cultures as a crime. It's just that Europe arrived at the table of civilization later than other continents. That's just a fact. And they're playing catch up. So it's almost as if to say, don't look to the past, we're it. So it's a way of dismissing and burying what came before. So the Greeks started it. They imposed their culture onto Africa's really ancient culture. So they even had the audacity to rename the monument that we call the Sphinx today. They renamed it the Sphinx when it's got nothing whatsoever to do with Greek mythology. That monument is a testament to a peoples of the Nile Valley civilization who over many thousands of years studied the stars, made observations, studied the universe, created deities as educational markers, and created esoteric symbols to represent that mass wisdom. So the monument that we know as the Sphinx is a message from the ancestors to their descendants. Don't forget, you are connected to the greatness of the constellations. So imagine that it's the head of Heru with the body of a lion looking to the constellations, very possibly the constellation of Leo. The ancestors saying you are connected to constellations, to animals, to plants, to insects. Everything is interconnected. This is your heritage. But, if the name is changed and the meaning is lost, that's thousands of years of stories passed down from generation to generation, kind of gone, nearly.
Raised.
And so therefore successive generations of oppressors build on that fact that you are without your heritage and foundation. Therefore, we can manipulate you in the way that we want to. The Romans were quite a little bit more embracing, you might say. So the River Thames in London, the original name is Thamesis. So they combined different deities from different mythologies. So Themis from Nordic culture and Isis from Egypt get Thamesis. And there is still a section of the River Thames in Oxford called the River Isis. And they built temples dedicated to Isis or Serapis, again, combining two different mythological deities to bring people together. Absolutely, it's to get people on your side. It's to say, we don't want to change your life totally, but we're bringing our own thing and we'd like the two to work together. So let's bring them together, see how it works. And it's also recognizing the fact there are pyramids on every continent. There are standing stones on every continent.
Right.
There's more that connects us than divides us. So the world, the planet had people who connected to the stars in very similar ways to the people of the Nile Valley. And I think wisdom, as we were talking about earlier, temples were effectively universities where people would go to learn. And in fact, it's written in stone on the walls of Kemetic temples, Nile Valley temples. It's written that students learned by degrees. What do we go to university for today?
4 degrees.
Yeah. So I think this was a global movement. I think people just went wherever the teaching was at its highest, whether that be in India, China, Africa, Europe, perhaps, that people moved around. Because, there are pyramids in Bosnia, and we know about South America, all over the world. Netflix of its day. It's World Heritage. Definitely, I think people learned how to live in the universe and try to attain spiritual balance. The peoples of the Nile Valley identified that as human beings, we exist between extreme opposites. So outside the entrance of a temple, you would have 2 obelisks representing extreme opposites. And of course, when you walk through the middle, that's a symbolism of trying to attain balance. So there's a lot to be learned from the ancients. Now, in the 10th century, in the 900s, a king in York commissioned the wise men of the land to go out and find the origins of wisdom. They came back with Kemetic wisdom, or as they call it, Egyptian mysticism. And that became the foundations of Freemasonry. African spirituality is actually at the roots and foundation of British culture and heritage, because you will find Freemasonry in every nook and cranny of the nation. So therefore, African spirituality is not new. There are different interpretations of Freemasonry, and most members will confirm that it's a society for good. But also, like with everything, power can be misused. If you're of a different religion, Freemasonry might be very important to your religion, but because of its origins, you want to keep the origins secret. So it's not seen that that particular continent's wisdom is a part of your heritage. So, sometimes the negative press works in your favor because people go, oh, don't want anything to do with that. But I think they're being more open now. And I'm not saying that everybody has to be a Freemason. What we're saying is, just like transatlantic trade contributed to Britain's wealth, ancient Kemetic wisdom has contributed to world heritage in many different ways, including Freemasonry, but in many other ways as well. Yeah, it's that human need to try and create balance. And that's what the ancient peoples of the Nile Valley, they understood the elements of life enough. They created the zodiac. They understood the movement of the planets. So you're trying to create a balance in a situation that's constantly moving. And they did it over many tens of thousands of years. So this is an incredible amount of experience. I mean, the Sphinx, judging by the watermarks, they reckon to be over 26,000 years old. So this is people connected to the stars, and however they have knowledge of the stars, like if you want to Google something, Google the Dogons. The Dogon people, they know about the constellations in ways that the West is still finding out. I can't tell you how they know, but once upon a time, I just think our brains were functioned on a different level, because they can tell you, for example, the deity Heru, where we get the Greek word hero. Heru came from a planet that was destroyed. He could fly at high speed and fought for truth, justice, and righteousness. Now, that sounds like Superman, of course, because people get their influences from ancient mythology. But the fact of the matter is that that's based on the history of a particular star that was destroyed and became part of the folklore and the narrative of peoples that was passed on from generation to generation. So Heru is symbolic of the greatness of this star, and he's represented either by a lion, as in the Sphinx, or as a falcon, because falcons have such incredibly keen eyesight. And that's where we get the eye of Horus, the falcon's eye, the all-seeing eye for Freemasons, and hence the so-called Illuminati, which is more Catholic than anything else, if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But the all-seeing eye comes from a heritage that is connected with the whole universe and not just evil. If you want to read more and find out more, I mean, my guru is Robin Walker, who wrote a book called When We Ruled. And it's an amazing book with amazing research. And you learn the richness of our heritage and the contributions that we've made to the world. And then in terms of the Black British history, I'd recommend Staying Power by Peter Fryer. And then also there's, of course, there's the Nigerian historian David Olusoga's Black and British, and there's Akala as well, Afua Hirsch. For more deep spiritual stuff, try Dr. John Henrik Clarke and Ivan van Sertima, and many others. But from there, you'll get the gist, and you'll be introduced to others if you Google those. Ancient African history is very important because that's what vehicles our humanity. And I think as artists, we have to know that we have contributed to the world. So we've got nothing to make up for or apologize for. We are part of the oldest peoples on the planet. And therefore, you know, the heritage is just within us. And uniquely, our ancestors did something very, very special. Because you remember in Lion King, Mufasa holds Simba up to the stars and says, "This is your heritage." And that was reflected in Black Panther as well. And, you know, that is just that they passed on that wisdom from generation to generation. And it was based on the rhythm of the universe. So we were engaged with the rhythm of the universe for thousands of years, generation after generation, learning to engage, interact with the universe with intelligence. We weren't about economic systems and da-da-da-da-da. Ma'at is about balance. That's one of the key principles. There are 6 other key principles, and justice being one of them. So Black Lives Matter and fighting for justice isn't just a recent thing that Africans have discovered. It's important to our spiritual balance. It's not just a matter of getting one over on somebody else for something they did or something they're doing. It's about, excuse me, we need this to be able to move on spiritually. And perhaps they know that. And so therefore, as the great writer Toni Morrison said, racism is just a distraction. If you commit injustice on a people, you disrupt their spiritual balance, and you then waste their time in them having to address it, because they have to address it. But it's like a time waster. It disrupts the balance. And reciprocity is one of the key principles, you know, give and take, sharing. And these 7 principles are important to our spiritual balance based on what was passed on through our genes over thousands of years. And being able to interact with the universe and be in tune with the rhythm of the universe is an important part of our heritage and an important part of our expression as artists as well. And there are 42 laws attached to Ma'at, all beginning with I, whereas Moses, who grew up with Ma'at as an Egyptian prince or a Kemetic prince, left Kemet, and the 42 laws of Ma'at became 10 commandments. The language changes to thou shalt not. So therefore, the responsibility for your ethics and your morals and your principles, which in Nile Valley was yours, is passed on to a superior being who will punish you if you get it wrong. That creates fear and anxiety. It's about knowing yourself, know thyself. And it's such a wonderful heritage that has given so much to the world. It has influenced the 3 Abrahamic faiths, but they are patriarchal. Ma'at was matriarchal. Say no more. So we feel different for a reason. We have to be different for a reason, because it's just within us. And it presents a tension and a conflict if we're not, you know, with that heritage. And so that brings us then up to West Africa. If we, that's the big origins of African civilization and humanity. And if we look at, and some say that that is rooted in Southern Africa, that there's a lot of evidence to be unearthed there, you know, because they discovered an Ankh in Southern Africa that's older than ancient Egypt. Nobody's an expert. So it's never too late to try and catch up. But in West Africa, I mentioned the Dogon peoples and having a very deep understanding of the stars. You have Timbuktu, one of the largest, most populated cities of its day, and with a university going back long before slavery, where books was the #1 source of income, despite them having gold and salt and being quite wealthy. And so therefore, knowledge and wisdom has always been a part of our heritage. So therefore, then that brings us to transatlantic slavery and moving, you know, and how traditions were incorporated, enslaved culture, and the significance of the West Indian Carnival has been a vehicle of African traditions that were held onto and should be valued and understood, used it as an educational tool, but also then to the Windrush generation. That, you know, people with a very rich heritage coming into a very cold society and into a hostile environment, and the skills that they had for survival. So for example, the pyramids, let's say the pyramids were built for their frequency in relation to the constellations. You get a rhythm and a sound. And I think there's always a location with water as well underneath.
Wow.
And so if you can imagine, they set frequencies for healing. Yeah. That's why the pyramids are all different shapes and sizes and stuff. Imagine sound systems and them using sound and frequencies, because back in the day, you had to use valves to get the
Wow.
right frequency, to get the right vibe, to create that healing vibe
Wow.
that people were just dying for. And so when you get that bass that drops right and everybody's just on a groove and everybody's just hitting the same, that's our heritage, that's our ancestors. You know, so embodied.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Embodied wisdom,
embodied.
embodied alchemy.
Therefore, it was something that you lived. You you had the knowledge. So you have African villages that are actually planned on the Fibonacci sequence,
Mm.
and what's but they use computers to repeat the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical sequence, and you get fractals. You get fractal patterns. There are African villages designed on fractal patterns.
Wow.
The ancient Nile Valley peoples understood about the glands in the human body and believed that the glands also connect with the universe and are impacted by the movements of the constellations. And then, of course, then you've got the Windrush generation, but before that, you had Africans, as mentioned before, in Victorian and Edwardian and even Georgian times, and we've got to dig those narratives out. But even
Yeah.
more important than that, as well, you've got Africans before transatlantic slavery living and working in Britain like regular people, tradespeople. There's a story of Shakespeare hired a, a weaver of silk who was of African heritage. So you had cobblers, you had courtiers, people in the royal court before transatlantic slavery. And so we've got to overcome all these lies and realize that our role in Britain isn't always to react constantly to political agendas, because that's by intent. They'll always create an injustice for us to react against. And whilst we're fighting that, because yeah, we do, for the next generation, we can also rise above it and know that, I don't think that's something we have to invent, because I think just by looking at the lives of our ancestors,
Mm.
different ancestors bring out different aspects.
Mm.
And by telling their stories, we reveal different important aspects
Mm-hmm.
to a very complex subject. And it's complex because our history is long, and we should be proud of that length. I think one of the greatest interventions in antagonism is narrative, is the stories
Yeah.
that you choose to tell, the stories that you promote. And as artists, we're capable of telling stories in a very unique way. And we shouldn't be waiting for some agenda to be set by the Arts Council. This is something we have to control
Yeah.
ourselves for the next generation to make it easier for them as well.
And I think like bringing it back round to this art of storytelling, the art of telling our stories, but actually our stories, looking back and then bringing that into this world and shining
Into
light.
Afrofuturism. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Bless.
Yes, thank you
Thank you.
so
That's
much.
been lovely. Thank you. I've really enjoyed that.
I mean, now I'm like, I want to do one every week.
So do I. I mean, the more you talk, the more you learn. And you learn from other
Yeah.
people. I've learned things from yourself this evening and that in other conversations as well. So it's all about discourse, learning, growing. Love it. I
Absolutely.
hope the audience have enjoyed it too.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
I just want to like also big up you and your knowledge. Joe's brain is like a library. It's got so much knowledge inside, and I'm really excited for your book when we get to read your book. And I know like, so having done the history walks a number of times, I can absolutely recommend. Go on a walk, you're going to learn so much. And that's like just a little bit of Joe's knowledge. It's immense.
As I said, it's not just me. I've been blessed to be able to come across some incredibly intelligent people like Khadija and David, Arthur and Robin Walker, and others in the community, Brother Urban Mohammed and others, where you just have street corner discussions. And after the bicentenary, I know that I was looking to find a source, a way of vehicling these emotions, because the industry in which I am a professional won't entertain what I regard as meaningful stories. So therefore, I've got to try to find a way to keep them alive. And I think it'll happen eventually. I think more people are listening. Thank you very much.